To the south of a small town forgotten by time lies a vast and ancient forest known as the Forest of Eternal Silence. The name was not given because of the absence of sound, but rather due to the overwhelming feeling that everything that had once lived there had been swallowed by an invisible darkness. It wasn't uncommon for the nearby villagers to whisper about those who ventured into the woods and never returned. Their stories, however, were always hushed, as if even speaking of the place could attract something sinister. This story begins with a group of 5 young adults who, on a cloudy afternoon, decided to challenge what they considered to be an unfounded myth. Students from a nearby university, they were naturally skeptical, driven by curiosity and the boredom that often accompanied the end of the semester. Gabriel, Marina, Hugo, Clara, and Andre were known among their peers for their constant search for the unusual. They wanted to explore the unknown, and the Forest of Eternal Silence seemed perfect for their next adventure. Ignoring the warnings from the small town they visited to stock up before their hike, they laughed at the worried expressions of the locals. For them, the fear of others was just fuel for their fun. They entered the forest at dusk, armed with backpacks, flashlights, and the firm belief that nothing but trees and wildlife awaited them. The path, which started as a dirt road, soon narrowed into a trail covered with branches and dry leaves that crunched beneath their feet. As they ventured deeper into the woods, they noticed that the sounds of the forest, once so vibrant with birdsong and the rustling of the wind, began to fade. The air grew dense, as if something was sucking the life out of nature itself. The silence that followed wasn't normal. It was deep and oppressive. "Is it just me, or is it getting colder?" Clara asked, huddling into her jacket. "We must be gaining some elevation," Gabriel said with a carefree smile, though he too felt a chill running down his spine. The trees seemed to close in around them, their trunks narrowing and twisting in strange ways. The sun, struggling to remain on the horizon, slowly disappeared, leaving the sky in a blood-red hue, while long shadows danced among the branches. After hours of walking, the group came upon a clearing where they decided to set up camp. Hugo was particularly excited, having brought a small camera to document the experience. He took pictures of the group, the surrounding landscape, and joked that they could use the images to create a scary story when they returned. While setting up tents and preparing the campfire, Marina excused herself to go to the bathroom. She walked a few meters into the darkness, turning on her flashlight as the natural light became insufficient. The sensation of being alone out there was strangely suffocating. The vegetation looked dead. The trees twisted like claws, and the ground was covered with a thick layer of leaves that made no sound as she stepped on them. She frowned at this realization, and the silence, which had been merely irritating before, now felt like a harbinger of something terrible. Then she heard it, a whisper. It didn't sound human. It was low, almost imperceptible, like a cold wind passing by, but there were words, distorted, incomprehensible. Marina froze, feeling a presence behind her. Heart pounding, she quickly swung the flashlight around, illuminating nothing but emptiness. The shadows danced among the trees, but there was no one. Breathing deeply, she tried to calm herself. "I must be scaring myself for no reason," she thought, hurrying back to the camp. When she returned, the group was laughing, playing cards around the campfire. She didn't mention what she had felt. She thought it better not to ruin the mood, but something inside her had shifted. She couldn't relax anymore. Her eyes kept darting to the edges of the clearing, where the firelight didn't reach. Something was hiding there. She could feel it as the night wore on. One by one, her friends retreated to their tents, laughing and talking about how they would become legends for defying local fears. Only Hugo stayed up a bit longer, adjusting his camera to capture images of the night sky. That's when the first incident occurred. The camera, set up on a small tripod, started capturing something unexpected. When Hugo reviewed the photos, he noticed a blur amidst the forest's darkness in the background. Something was moving between the trees, too fast to be captured clearly. At first, he thought it was an animal, perhaps a deer or a wolf, but as he zoomed in on the image, he realized the silhouette was human. His heart raced. He looked around. The trees swayed softly under a cold breeze, but no sound came except the crackling of the fire. He turned off the camera and entered his tent, without saying anything to the others. It was just my imagination, he thought, trying to convince himself as he closed his eyes. But he couldn't sleep. The wind picked up, and the trees around the clearing began to emit strange sounds, almost like wailing. A distant murmur reverberated through the air, low and indistinct. Hugo opened his eyes inside the tent. The sound seemed closer, clearer. He held his breath, trying to listen. It was a voice, almost human but broken, like it came from a throat that hadn't spoken in a long time. "Help!" Hugo shot up, cold sweat running down his back. He stepped out of the tent without waking the others and looked around. His flashlight flickered as he scanned the shadows, but there was nothing. Only the absolute silence, interrupted by that echo. The voice came again, louder this time. "Help me!" He took a hesitant step toward the trees. The clearing seemed to drift farther away. When he realized he had wandered too far, he felt the air leave his lungs. The voice was now coming from all directions. Something moved among the shadows, and then he saw it. A figure, standing between the trees. It was a man. His body was thin and hunched, his skin gray like that of a corpse. His eyes, hollow and empty, seemed to pull Hugo in. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. He stumbled back, falling onto the damp leaves. The figure stepped forward, then vanished into the darkness. Back at the camp, Gabriel was the first to notice Hugo's absence. By morning, the group gathered to search for him, but there was no sign. Hugo's camera lay abandoned on the ground, the last image frozen on a distorted figure in the background. Clara started crying, while Marina stared at the trees, feeling something watching them. As hours passed, they realized they were trapped. None of the paths they followed led them back out of the forest. The trees seemed to move, shifting the landscape, creating labyrinths. Every attempt to escape only drew them deeper into the woods. As despair grew, so did the visions. Andre swore he saw people lurking among the trees, their faces twisted with pain, their hands reaching out as if begging for help. Marina began to hear the whispers again, louder now, calling her name. That night, as Clara tried to sleep, something entered her tent. She felt the presence before she even opened her eyes. A supernatural cold enveloped her, and the stench of rot filled her nose. When she finally opened her eyes, she saw the face of a child, pale, with hollow eyes and black tears streaming down its cheeks. She tried to scream, but the child placed a finger on her lips, whispering, "You will stay with us too." And so it went. One by one, they were taken. By morning, the clearing was empty. Only the echoes of lost voices lingered in the air. The group was never seen again. The forest of eternal silence continued to keep its secrets. And just as the trees grow, so too do the number of lost souls, trapped on the threshold between life and death. In an endless cycle of horror,